live on YouTube. We are. Oh, come on. There we go. Why? Okay, there we go. All right, now I think we're ready. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's good to see everyone here in the sanctuary and on Zoom. If you, I see some people who I know have not been here since we've started our in-person services back up again. So just a little bit of explanation. I am going to be announcing page numbers if you would like to use a prayer book. Otherwise, if you would rather look on the screen, all of the prayers that we're going to be joining together in this evening will be on our screen. And so all of you who are on Zoom should see everything as we're going through our service this evening. I hope that as we join together this evening, that we're all able to find a sense of Shabbat restfulness and peace. One more note about as I say certain cues throughout the service to please rise or please be seated, I want to make sure everyone knows that I mean that we'll rise together either in body or spirit as our abilities allow us. Someone's. Okay. So we are going to begin our service, assuming that my computer will cooperate, on page 126. I begin with a prayer of gratitude for all that is holy in my life. God needs no words, no English or Hebrew, no semantics and no services, but I need them. Through prayer, I can sense my inner strength, my inner purpose, my inner joy, my capacity to love. As I reach upward in prayer, I sense these qualities in my Creator. To love God is to love each other, to work to make our lives better. To love God is to love the world God created and to help work to perfect it. To love God is to love dreams of peace and joy that illumine all of us and to bring that vision to life. We'll continue on page 128 as we join together in singing the words of the Psalm 133, Hine Ma Tov, how good it is for all of us to be together. Hine Ma Tov u'manayim sheverachim gam yachad. Hine Ma Tov u'manayim sheverachim gam yachad. Hine Ma Tov. U'manayim. Oy, 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 sheverachim. continue on page 130. Again, joining together in words of Psalms from Psalm 95 and 96, Lechu Niranana, giving thanks to God for all of the wonders of creation. Continue welcoming Shabbat with the singing of Lecha Dodi on page 138. If you're looking in your prayer books, we'll be joining together in verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. And if you're just looking at the screen, we'll be singing exactly what's there. And as we reach the final verse, verse 9, we'll stand and face the entryway to welcome Shabbat like a bride or a queen. Ya la 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 Dodi, ya la 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 likatala, ya la 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 b'nei Shabbat, b'nei Shabbat lekavela, zamor v'zachor, v'nivorecha. Please be seated. We are going to continue on page 120 as we kindle the Shabbat candles. If you have candles at home that you'd like to join us in the lighting, now is the time. As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we by our lives give light to all who behold us, as their brightness reminds us of generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we in our own day be among those who kindle light.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
We'll continue on page 144. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba ve'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael bagala Uvizman kariv veimeru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'alam u'l'ol me'almaya yitbarach ve'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal Shemei de kedusha brichu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'imeru amen. We'll rise together for our call to prayer on page 146. La 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 continue on page 148. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Oreyon, la laila, golelor mipne choshech, golelor mipne choshech, vechoshech mipne yor. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Oreyon, la laila, golelor mipne choshech, golelor mipne choshech, vechoshech mipne yor. We'll continue on the bottom of page 151. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol, all these things your Torah gives to us, and the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. We'll rise for a Shema on page 152 and 153. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Please be seated. We'll continue on page 154. Ve'ahavta et uvechol meodecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom alevavecha vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha Uvalechtecha baderech, uvshochbecha, uvkumecha, ukshartam leot al yadecha, behayu letotafot beineinecha, uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uvisharecha, leman tizkeru, Ma'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'hitem kedoshim le'Elohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem. We'll continue on page 157 at the top. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. We'll continue with our prayer for freedom and redemption, Mi Chamocha, on page 158. Continue on page 161. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, apores sukat shalom aleinu, Be'al kol amo Yisrael, be'al Yerushalayim. We'll continue on page 164. As we rise together for tefillah, we'll continue on even numbered pages. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Velohei Avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Velohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Velohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chastei Avot V'imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Be'ezrat Sarah. Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai, Mechaye Hakol Ata Rav Lehoshia, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechaye Hakol Berachamim Rabim. Somech noflim verofech olim, umatir asurim, umekayem emunato lishenei afar, michamocha ba'al gevurot, umido melach, Melech memit umechaye umatzmiach Yeshua v'ne'eman ata lahachayot hakol Baruch atah Adonai mechaye hakol. On the top of page 171, days pass and the years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. God, fill our eyes with seeing and our minds with knowing. Let there be moments when your presence, like lightning, illumines the darkness in which we walk. Help us to see wherever we gaze that the bush burns unconsumed, and we, clay touched by God, will reach out for holiness and exclaim in wonder, how filled with awe is this place, and we did not know it. Blessed is the Eternal One, the Holy God. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Please be seated. We'll continue on the top of page 173. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai mikadesh hashabbat. And a prayer for Thanksgiving will continue on page 177. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more, we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulecha na'eh lehodot. We'll continue with our prayer for peace, Shalom Rav, on page 178. We're going to sing it a cappella. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. B'tov beinecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael bechol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. We'll take a moment now for our own quiet thoughts and prayers. Yehiyu leratzon imrei fi behegyo libi lefanecha Adonai Tzuri Adonai Tzuri Begoali Begoali Yehu leratzon Imrei fi Begyo libi lefanecha Adonai Tzuri Adonai Tzuri Begoali Begoali. We devote the next few moments of our service to think of those in our congregational family, our loved ones, our friends who are in need of a prayer of healing. If you are thinking of someone who is in need of a prayer of healing and you are joining us on Zoom and you'd like to share a name with us, please feel free to write their name in the chat. And if you are here in the sanctuary and there's someone who you're thinking of at this time, as I look your way, please feel free to share their name. Esther Greenwald, Warren Siegel, Ursula Hartunian, Tara Farr, Gail Rose Carmack. We say together, Baruch atah Adonai Rofeh HaCholim. Blessed is God who brings healing to those who are in need of a prayer of healing. We'll join together on page 371 as we sing Mishaberach. Mishaberach Avotenu Mikor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mikor HaBracha Leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We, last week, began reading from the book of Deuteronomy, and this book contains so many of our important pieces of our tradition that we know of. And it just so happens that this week's Torah portion contains two of the biggest things in our tradition. One of them you can see right in front of you, we've said it already this evening, is the Shema. And the other thing you can also see in front of you, if you can see behind me, you see the tablets of the 10 Commandments. Both of those things appear in this week's Torah portion. Among other things, there are some other very important pieces in this week's Torah portion, one of which is Moses pleading with God to let him enter the promised land. It's one of a couple of times where Moses is trying to negotiate, to bargain, if you will, so that he can enter the land. But when you really look at this Torah portion, those are the two things that kind of strike you because they're so important to our tradition. And one of the questions that I've seen asked before is, why, if these two things, these two pieces of our Torah are so important, are they linked together in the same Torah portion? It would have been just as easy for whoever historically who decided to divide the Torah portions the way they do, to give these two things this kind of separate honor that they would kind of on their own deserve to have. And as I've kind of learned or continued learning even after rabbinical school, one of my favorite things that I have seen and learned post-rabbinical school is actually, I think, contains the answer to why they're linked together now, even though it's not overtly clear if you're looking at the text that we have today. So I'm going to tell a little story, which is actually a real piece of history, and it is partly it holds the key to kind of, I think, understanding why these two things are linked together the way they are. So in the late 1800s, there was a man named Moshe Wilhelm Shapira. Some of you might have heard me talk about him before. He was one of the great antiquities dealers in Jerusalem of his day, until one day he had a Bedouin come to visit his store in Jerusalem and offer him a deal that he ultimately couldn't refuse. Up until this point, Moshe Wilhelm Shapira was he was a legitimate antiquities dealer. He didn't deal in forgeries. He wouldn't allow them in his shop. And he would often find or Bedouins would often find his shop and bring him things that were oftentimes very valuable. And they would receive some commission from whatever he sold. One day, one of the Bedouins came in. And so the deal that he made was, someone claimed to find a Moabitic artifact. Does anyone know anything about the Moabites? The Moabites are an ancient people. There are other things that kind of allude to the Moabites in other texts that we know of, but very few. And there was one particular text, something that somebody found, which kind of started a craze. Archaeologists who were digging in the Dead Sea area found a stele, an ancient stone carving that referenced the Moabites. And so this Bedouin came to Moshe Wilhelm Shapira and says, I can create Moabite artifacts for you, and I can sell them to you. And then when you sell them, I can bring you more the next day. What he was trying to say without saying it overtly is, I'm going to make these for you. They're not real. And Moshe Wilhelm Shapira said, I'll take it. So what's kind of interesting about this story is that today, if you're looking on the market, you can search for, and some people still collect Moshe Wilhelm Shapira fakes as like a collector's item. But eventually, some museum curators, in particular, the museum curator of the British Museum of Antiquities, discovered that the things that Moshe were calling Moabitic artifacts were forgeries. But it took a long time for them to figure this out because no one had ever seen a Moabitic artifact before. So there was a lot of kind of deciphering to do. And in those days, they didn't really have carbon dating or other things that would help to actually date what they were talking about. So in any case, another one of Moshe's Bedouins one day, I should say Moshe, once the discovery was made, Moshe's reputation as an antiquities dealer was destroyed. No one would buy from him anything of real value, even though he still had quite a few things in his shop that were valuable. After a few years, and the kind of storm of, even then there was a storm of the press, and after all that had died down, people were starting to come back in his shop. He was starting to gain some notoriety again. And one of his Bedouin friends brought him a text. This time it was a scroll. And it was a fragment of a scroll, and it was written in a language, again, that most people had never seen before. The language, as it turns out, was ancient Hebrew. I should also say, as an aside, this that we read is actually not ancient Hebrew. This is in a script that some people identify as Syriac or ancient Syriac, and it was adopted by the Israelites during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, so before the construction of the Second Temple. Before that, almost all Jewish texts were written in a completely different script that we call ancient or Paleo Hebrew. So this scroll that this Bedouin brought in was written in in Paleo Hebrew, and it caused a new firestorm. Moshe's name was back in the newspaper again, and he was gaining notoriety, and the British Museum was this close to paying over £1 million for this little tiny scroll. The same curator who recognized the work of Shapira's shop as being a forgery in the first place came back out to kind of check out to see if this was legitimate. But because so few things had ever been seen written in Paleo Hebrew, again, he said, we can't trust this guy. It's a fake. It has to be. He's done this before. Thankfully, some students and some museum curators made a handwritten copy, because that's how you copied ancient texts in those days. And so we kind of know what it was that he had. What did Moshe Wilhelm Shapira actually have? He had a more than 2,800-year-old version of the book of Deuteronomy. What happened to the scroll? Once this curator came and said that the scroll was a fake, Moshe Wilhelm Shapira sadly committed suicide, and his treasures from his shop were sold at auction, and a German book collector bought the scroll of Deuteronomy. And we know today, based on all sorts of other evidence, that it was most likely real. And sadly, that collector's library burned to the ground. The scroll doesn't exist anymore. But we have the copy that the museum curators made, and so we know something about the way the book of Deuteronomy, at least at one point in history, looked. And one of the things that was very interesting and that people still write about is the fact that in the scroll, there were not only 10 commandments, as we say that there are 10 commandments. In fact, in the tablets of the law as they exist in the book of Deuteronomy, because I could spend much more time talking about this, but there's actually 2 other versions of the 10 commandments in the Torah. Both of them are in the book of Exodus. But the one that exists in the book of Deuteronomy, this ancient scroll had 11 commandments. And the last of the commandments is going to sound familiar to all of you, at least when I translate it in English. It was a repetition of another verse that we find in the book of Leviticus. It said, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which means love your neighbor as yourself. That was the 11th commandment on the tablets that were given to Moses and the people of Israel at Mount Sinai, according to the most ancient scroll we've ever found of the Bible. So why is that important, and why is that the key to the story? Because when you look at the second line of the Shema, which we've already read as a part of our service this evening, we read a different verse that begins with the exact same word, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Love Adonai your God with all of your heart. So I think one of the reasons why in the ancient world, when the rabbis were coming up with the way that we divide up how we read the Torah, that there was an insistence on putting these 2 super important pieces of our tradition together, because they contained the same word. Ve'ahavta, in this case, love your neighbor as yourself. And Ve'ahavta, love Adonai your God with all of your heart. And the rabbis say, they ask the question, what does it mean to love? What does it mean to love God? Loving God means loving your neighbor. Making the Shema and the 10 Commandments are both designed to create understandings of how human beings are supposed to live together. We live together in sacred space, together in our ability to work together as community. And both of those things are part of our covenant as Jews, but there's a reason why the 10 Commandments have made it as such important things, not only for our religious tradition, but our cultural tradition, is that they are supposed to inspire a kind of community where we live together in covenant, looking out for each other, and ultimately, hopefully, holding a kind of love for each other that allows for all of us to live together in peace, in the pursuit of justice and safety and peace for all people. So I'm hoping that as we are kind of re-entering a time that has the potential to be scary, that we hold on to this idea that we are still living in a world that has a lot of danger presently as this new variant of the coronavirus is really affecting a lot of people, to the point where I know colleagues of mine who were fully open just as we are, who have now completely had to shut down again in cities very much like ours. And their congregants and their cities are really being affected by this, in part because I think this idea of covenant, of being responsible for each other, is not being held on to in the way that it should be. I know that this is a particularly challenging thing to wrap our minds around, that we feel like we're so close to the end of what's going on in the world, but we need to remain diligent, I think. And I think that means making sure that we're extra safe and also living our lives in a way that we feel comfortable and safe in doing it, but holding in our minds always what it means when how our actions might affect other people in our community. So I hope that we are all able, as we are going about our everyday lives, and as we are seeing all of the things that come in the news, and as the situation changes, that we're able to adapt and be responsible and hold others who are in our community in our thoughts, and act in a way that is responsible and ultimately is a way that reflects our loving our neighbors as ourselves. Shabbat Shalom. We are going to continue on page 586 as we rise together for Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol, l'teit gedula liotzer b'reshit, shelo asanu kigoyei haratzot, v'lo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, v'goraleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishkachavim u'modim, lifnei melech, malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu.
Please be seated. We'll continue on page 591. May we gain wisdom in our lives, overflowing like a river with understanding. Loved each of us for the peace we bring to others. May our deeds exceed our speech, and may we never lift up our hand but to conquer fear and doubt and despair. Rise up like the sun, O God, over all humanity. Cause light to go forth over all the lands between the seas, and light up the universe with the joy of wholeness, of freedom, and of peace. V'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. We devote the next few moments of our service to honor the memories of those who we have loved and lost, holding in our hearts those for whom this Shabbat and the previous week were a yahrzeit or an anniversary of their death. Jerome Hartman, Sel Bader, Ernest J. Mier Jr., Benjamin Smith, Libby Zelda Saltzman, Irving Abrams, Stanley Cook, Leo Geisberg, Mark Berman, Stephen Barry Block, Jerome Sachs, Gilbert Wolfe. If there are loved ones you're holding in your hearts and you are on Zoom and you'd like to share their name in the chat, I'll read them in a moment. And if there's anyone who you are holding in your hearts that you'd like to say their name for Kaddish, please feel free to share their name as I look your way. We say Zichronam Livracha, may the memories of our loved ones who came before us forever be a blessing. We'll join together on page 598 as we rise for Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute, v'chaye echon u'vyom echon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'gala u'bizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shemei Rabbah mivarach le'olam olomei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, V'yit hadar, v'yit ale, v'yit halal, shemei de kedusha barichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates peace in the heavens on high bring peace to us, to all Israel and all the world, and comfort to all those who are mourning. Together we say, Amen. Please be seated. I don't think I have any announcements for this evening other than to say I'm still checking if you or you know someone in the congregation who would like to come to the baby naming that we're doing next week in honor of my daughter, to that the RSVP I think is still open, and I can check it even though today was technically the deadline. It's okay. Just so we know, have a good count for how much food that we need to get. Please let us know if you're coming. Yeah, otherwise we will join together in saying Kiddush and blessing our children and Motzi, and we'll conclude our service. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen l'chaim. And whether you are with your children right now or holding your children in your hearts, we will say this blessing for all of our kiddos. Yisimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'chi Menashe. May you be blessed like the sons of Joseph, Ephraim, and Menashe. Yisimech Elohim ke'Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah. May you be blessed like the mothers of our people, like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. We wish for all of our children to always be blessed with being proud of who they are and of always striving to be the best version of themselves, as we bless them with these words from Torah. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May God's light shine on you and be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's presence always feel close to you, and may you be blessed always with the most important gifts of wholeness and peace. We say together, Amen. And we have, as I said, beginning of service is a very tasty smelling challah. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We give thanks to God for bread. Our voices rise in song together as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. a little concern. We are going to join together in singing a prayer for peace as our concluding song. And then I will unmute everyone on Zoom and say Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.